20 at 3:01, meeting order. Can we have roll call, please?
Yes. Director Riley,
Here.
Director Hoffman,
Here.
and Director Edwards,
Here.
all present.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Now we have public comment on the public. The public may comment on any item within the district jurisdiction. Please limit your comments to 3 minutes in length. Public comment is open.
I see no raised hands.
Thank you.
Director Edwards.
Yes. Thank you. Our first action item. Consider adoption of May 7, 2020 committee minutes, meeting. Can we have a motion?
I move approval.
I will second.
Thank you. This will be a roll call vote. Anyone from the public want to comment?
All right, I'll take the vote.
Right.
Director Riley,
Yes.
Director Hoffman,
Yes.
and Director Edwards.
Yes.
Approved unanimously.
Thank you.
You're
Now
welcome.
we'll go into discussion items. General Manager?
Yes, this first one, Stephanie Locke, I'll let her lead, and then I think we have 2 PowerPoints that go with it.
Yes.
She'll do the first.
Okay. So committee, this item is an update on the water needs, immediate water needs for regional housing in the district. It was a request that went to the water demand, or I'm sorry, technical advisory committee in February. And at that time, we asked the TAC to determine what their water needs for the next 3 to 4 years are for housing. And we gave them a deadline of May 1st, and we heard from some of the jurisdictions. We did not hear from the city of Delray Oaks or Monterey County. And anyway, I've put together a little PowerPoint just that will summarize what we got in response to our request for information. And there you go. So the city of Carmel by the Sea requested, and we do not currently have any immediate affordable housing projects that are under review. And then at the bottom of each of these, I'm putting the allocation report information from last month. And for the city of Carmel by the Sea and Carmel area, Malpaso water has been available for projects within the jurisdiction, and their actual water allocations and credits remaining are 2.661 acre feet. Next one. City of Delray Oaks, we did not get a response from, and they have no water left. City of Monterey probably did the most work on this project. They identified 6 near-term shovel-ready projects that would result in 300 housing units. You've seen, I believe, 2 of those projects have already come through with the request for the district reserve allocation. And the city requested 23 acre feet, but that actual number could be less. The developers have agreed to put in high efficiency appliances and gray water systems. And if they do the gray water systems and the other things, that actually reduces the amount needed by about 15 plus acre feet. The city's allocation report last month said that they had 2.575 acre feet remaining. Next, Carmen.
Yeah, I'm trying to, there we go.
There you go. Okay. PG requested an extension till May of next year. They're just recently contracted to have a consultant put together more exact housing numbers for them, and they felt that they would have those numbers by May next year. But if they had to get a number today, the request is for 30.7 acre feet. And you can see the breakdown the different types, multifamily, accessory dwelling unit, and single family. They specifically requested that there be no restrictions on use of any water that we free up as a result of this exercise. The allocation report from the May board meeting, they had 0.079 acre feet remaining in their allocations and credit. And they have an entitlement right now that there's 37.676 acre feet of water available in. Sand City requested 9.54 acre feet. They identified two large multifamily projects, the Independent Phase 2 and the West End Mixed Use Project. And then they also have 5 to 6 ADU projects. In their allocation report, they have 23.273 acre feet in their city allocation and credit. And they have an entitlement that right now has 199.634 acre feet. City of Seaside requested 20.6 acre feet. They are anticipating 125 multifamily units and approximately 80 accessory dwelling units. And I do want to mention that when they made this request, they identified that a number of the multifamily units might be in the Campus Town project. And the Campus Town project is not served by Cal-Am, it's served by Marina Coast. So we may have to make adjustments for that purpose. The allocation report shows that they have 34.703 acre feet remaining in their allocations and credit. Unincorporated County we did not get a response from them, but I did want to note the various different water pockets that are available in the county. Their main allocation credit is 12.844 acre feet. My understanding is that it's fully committed to projects, but they have not come through us for water permits. Pebble Beach still has almost 277 acre feet available. Malpaso entitlement still shows that there's 63.464 acre feet that does not come through our office yet. Water West, which is a former water distribution system that Cal-Am took over in Carmel Valley, and it has a special allocation, has 3.347 acre feet remaining there. So that kind of is a short wrap up of what the responses were. And now I think, Dave, you've got more information to share.
Yeah, but just staying on the slide for a moment, one of the differences between what the allocator has done versus what we see is demonstrated here. So when it says remaining county allocations, almost 13 acre feet, the county will tell you that they've pretty much committed that to projects that have come through to them. We just haven't seen them come through to us. Malpaso, the same thing. They had 80 acre feet that they have sold, and it's been fully subscribed for, but that hasn't come through. So there's always this issue, and there's been this issue in the past in some of the cities as well, where they believe they've allocated water and a project doesn't get off the ground, and that allocation remains kind of off the board for 2, 3, 4, 5 years. And we've encouraged the jurisdictions to hold their builders and developers feet to the fire and say, hey, pick a time period, and if you haven't put plans together and pulled a permit by then we're taking the water back. But that's not really our job, it's their job. But so sometimes these numbers appear a little overinflated.
And actually, just to carry that just a step further, the county allocation is 12.8 acre feet. We've been sitting at 12.8 since the 90s, I believe. And there's a good portion of it, over 8.5 acre feet, I think, is assigned to some property in the Carmel Valley Ranch subdivision. But yeah, so we don't necessarily, this just means that they haven't come through and pulled a water permit yet.
Great. All right, Arlene, if you'd queue up the next one. Great. So I want to give you a sense of where we started and what's happened and where we plan to go with respect to this effort to see if we can free up some water for affordable / workforce housing. Which, by the way, if it becomes a market rate housing with an affordable element, it would get lumped in there. So you'll see some of the cities will have a 20% or 25% set aside for affordable, which means in those projects, you'd still be building market rate housing as well. Next slide. Arlene, yeah. So here's what we've done to date. We presented concepts to the board in August of 2019 of how we might go about, just as the district using our own powers, identify some water that we could put into a pool and make available to the jurisdictions. The board sent that back to the Water Demand Committee. We discussed concepts at Water Demand Committee in December, and we decided to focus on basically the easiest approach, which would be to just declare that there's water available from collective conservation savings and do that as a board action, create a pool of water. But we needed to figure out what that need would be. So we convened the TAC. They met briefly and then were assigned out homework on their own in February. And that homework is what Stephanie just went through, which is identify your near-term 3 to 4 year housing needs, and let's translate that to water and try to figure out what pool of water collectively across the peninsula might be needed. The Garden Road parcels were advanced by the city of Monterey with a letter in February, and that came to the March and then the April and the May Water Demand Committee meeting. The night before the March Water Demand Committee meeting, the State Water Board, through their Office of the Chief Counsel, attorney named Steve Westoff, sent an email, which we'll summarize in a second, which was made available to the Water Demand Committee, basically warning us that the enforcement of Condition 2 of the cease and desist order could be triggered by the action that we were contemplating with respect to the Garden Road properties. The board went ahead on the May 18th meeting and awarded an allocation to expand 2 Garden Road projects, the expansion component being 100% affordable on top of the component that would fit the existing site capacity. So it'd be an increase in capacity to use water on that site. We had staff discussion with the State Water Board. I think it was the day after of the board meeting that I called Steve Westoff. It was certainly that week to let them know that this had happened and that this is a real important issue and that we're going to need to address it, and that the State Housing and Community Development Department has a strong interest in this as well. And then on the 29th, I had a conversation with the Deputy Director, the Division of Water Rights, Eric Ekdahl, just to say, we really do have a problem. Next slide. So the starting point for our for the issues and why the state may need to be involved is Condition 2 of the cease and desist order, which says Cal-Am shall not divert water from the Carmel River for new service connections, and then highlighted here, or for any increased use of water at existing service addresses resulting from a change in zoning or use. We have been, call it in negotiation with the State Water Board for almost 7 years now about how to interpret Condition 2. And our current positions, and there's been no final position issued, but the current positions differ between the district and the state in change in use, a baseline measurement, what can be counted as available water, and what is a service address. And we've not reconvened a meeting with the state on this for over a year at this point because as we've expressed and they understand, it looks like we're never going to come to agreement. Next slide, please. So why did Garden Road attract the attention and the email? Well, it hit the trifecta. There was a change in zoning. There would be a change in use going from commercial to residential. And by virtue of allocating additional water from the district reserve, there would be an increase in the capacity to use water relative to the table 2 factors that the district would use on the previous use. So it hit on all 3 points, and I think that's why it garnered the attention, which kind of changed our strategy a little bit, because we were primarily looking at things we could do unilaterally on our own, use our local permitting, and just move forward and issue permits, because we all agreed there'd be no reason to set new meters, no reason to go to California American Water, and off to the races. Next slide, please. And this is what that email said. Basically, condition 2 would prohibit an increased use of water at the service addresses, that that the increase in use could not be avoided, cured, or offset with the district reserve. So, i.e., we don't recognize the district reserve water as available. And then the permitting for the properties would likely lead to a violation of condition 2, even though it would be allowed under our local permitting system. Next slide. Next. Okay, so the actual moratorium says that, and this is, back up, please. Uh-oh, got to go the other way. Arlene? There we go. So the cease and desist order was the ordering language to get off the river, but in order to not set a new meter and actually satisfy the first part of condition 2, no new service connections, the company needed to be able to do that, and they needed the PUC to direct them to do that. And so the PUC did, in fact, issue a decision in 2011 that directed Cal-Am to modify its tariffs to recognize that it's not authorized to provide service to the extent that it would violate the terms of condition 2. And the interesting thing is, under Public Utilities Commission rules, you can't unreasonably discriminate in rates and service between similar types of users and customers. And so, and that's in the Public Utilities Code. But here, they said there would be no violation of that unreasonable discrimination. So in other words, you could discriminate because of the explicit findings of the order, all 3 orders at the time. There was a follow-up order to the 2000. And so there is a rational basis for differentiation. And that rational basis in this Public Utilities Code is the only place where they said, in fact, they've done the work to say you can discriminate. It was in a footnote, it's footnote 49. And they provided no guidance as to how you might enforce on this, other than to say you can treat customers differently if a customer is increasing use due to a change in zoning or use. Next slide. Then along comes Senate Bill 330 last year, signed into law by the governor in 2019. That's your governor on the left, and that's Nancy Skinner, the bill's sponsor, on the right. And this bill became titled the Housing Crisis Act of 2019. Next slide. So what SB 330 does is it says, we are experiencing a housing supply and affordability crisis of historic proportion. Next. And that pushing housing out away from urban centers or away from workplaces increases risk to life and health problems. The lack of affordable housing is a public health and safety risk, and that it's a policy of the state that a local government not reject or make infeasible housing development projects. And finally, local governments are restrained from imposing a moratorium or similar restriction or limitation on housing development. And this is an interesting one because we've had at least one city attorney and city planner say, well, the CDO and the PUC, while it's a moratorium on water, is de facto a moratorium on housing and would be restrained under this new law. And while I see some credence to that argument, as the state typically does, they wrote it with respect to local governments, cities and counties, and they didn't say, and state governments are restrained from imposing moratoriums that would restrict or limit housing. Furthermore, next slide. It also says that the government code should be amended to read that you can't disapprove housing for low or for very low or moderate base income housing unless you have findings. And one of the potential findings with evidence in section 4 of this paragraph D is if it does not have adequate water or wastewater facilities to serve the project. So in fact, it would be difficult to state that the CDO and the PUC moratorium are a moratorium on housing when it specifically identifies a lack of water as a reason for disapproving housing. So it's unlikely that Senate Bill 330 would trump the cease and desist order, which brings us back to, does that mean all roads have to go through the State Water Board? Next, please. There's a slim opening under the CDO. And this is the revised CDO from July of 2016. Section 3.c says that either the company or the district may petition for relief as long as three things are met. And the third being a showing is made that public health and safety will be threatened if relief is not granted. So here we have one bill declaring a crisis in housing and citing health and safety reasons. So it's a nice nexus and perhaps a door that we could walk through. But as is often the case, words have meaning. And because up at the top it said relief from reductions imposed, the likely interpretation is that it only applies to the relief from reductions and not relief from condition 2 outright. And so I think we would have to contend that the intent of relief for health and safety was that the conditions of the whole order that affect the health and safety could be given relief. But the strict reading of the words is it only provides for relief from the reductions. And the reductions in the original order were annual numerical required reductions to get to the legal right. The reductions under the new order are you have an effective diversion limit, you've got an end right, a legal right. If you miss milestones, we'll make additional reductions on the effective diversion limit. So the reductions changed a little bit, but again, the language refers to reductions. I think where we're headed is trying to open the door to some sort of relief for health and safety using the Housing Crisis Act as the measure of health and safety, which might end up limiting any water that's allocated to the cities specifically to housing, even though we at the district had said, hey, we'll identify how much water is needed for housing, but we can't control what the jurisdictions do with it afterwards. Next slide, please. So this is the where do we go from here slide. And I think where we're at now that we received all the information from the jurisdiction members of the TAC is we need to take that information that Stephanie laid out for you. There are at least 3 and possibly 4 different ways to allocate water to the cities. You know, the obvious easy one would be you've got 6 jurisdictions, well, 7 actually, 6 cities and the unincorporated county. Give them all an equal 1/7 share of whatever number you think is reasonable to ask for. However, their housing needs, their regional housing needs allocation numbers are all different. Their available water that they still have in allocation are all different, and their populations are all different. So I think there's some different weighting schemes that we can come up with, and that's what we'll be working on here in the next couple of weeks. And then we also have to ask ourselves how much is too much to ask for, and what's reasonable. So we will have a proposal, a staff directed proposal that we'll take to the technical advisory committee that we're going to try to set up a meeting at the end of June. And if we're unable to get a meeting set up, then the next item won't have the benefit of hearing how it went over with the TAC, but we'll still update the Water Demand Committee on what the proposed ask is at the July meeting, knowing that the TAC members, i.e. the jurisdictions, are likely to either have collective unhappiness over what we've suggested or alternative suggestions on how it could be done. We would expect to hear back from the TAC entities in July, finalize the ask with Water Demand Committee at its August 6th meeting, enlist the support of the State Housing and Community Development Department in August, petition the State Water Board for relief, and highlight that we think the intent of that opening in 3C wasn't limited strictly to the reductions, but to any aspect that affects health and safety. And then allow for discussions with the State Water Board and the Housing and Community Development Department, likely September, October. And then hopefully get some sort of suggested approach from the State Water Board in November, possibly, and it all depends on their schedule once we get into the state government. And we'll either have some success or start over on a plan B. And that's just kind of what I wanted to lay out in front of you. It's a very complex issue. The days of the district just doing what the district wants and recognizing that if you don't have to go get a meter from Cal-Am, then no one's paying attention. Those days are over because people are paying attention. So I think the starting point is try to work with the state. This is a recognized priority by another state department and frankly, the legislature. Housing is. So, I think we should get some traction on this, but that's kind of where it's at and where it's going. And that concludes my presentation.
Questions?
Yeah, go ahead, George.
The argument that we're making with your supply and demand report is that more recent data has relevance than basing decisions on old data. The AB or SB 330 argument is the same thing. As circumstances catch up with the facts on the ground and passes the facts on the ground, we're stuck with an old order that does not reflect current priorities and also current interest by the jurisdictions. I'm pretty impressed with the jurisdictions seeming to. I don't say it's deep, but I don't know how far along any particular plans are, except those in Monterey. But they seem to be pretty conscientious about trying to find a water allocation and an approach to low-cost housing. I'm sorry, affordable housing. Anyway, I'm just curious about some of the logic that might be playing out. I'm curious too what you made of Westcoff's call-in to the meeting earlier this week. Well, or maybe it was, I think if I have his language right, I think he said he makes a distinction between what is a permanent supply and what is a adequate or sufficient supply.
Right.
Where do you put those remarks into this context?
Yeah, so Steve is a real thoughtful guy. What we found, even though we never came to agreement over how to treat Condition 2, we found that Eric Ekdahl, the deputy director, and Steve out of the legal department put their work in, and they worked hard at understanding it. But what I've detected from both of them is, and I've used this term before, but they don't want us back in the principal's office in 3 years. So even if we had a sufficient supply today, and we're very, very close to it. I mean, we're, less than 800 acre feet away from having enough water to not have any unlawful diversions. But you have to expect that there's going to be some need for water next year, the subsequent 4 or 5 years. So their point is just enough for today may not be enough for a couple of years from now. So we don't want to keep doing this thing. We don't want you to be recidivist and undersell what your needs are, because we don't want to be back at this in short order. And that makes sense. It really does make sense. The interesting thing is others have pointed this out. All the numbers that we've done in the supply and demand analysis, or the staff note that we had for water supply planning on Monday, has recognized the in lieu recharge of the Seaside groundwater basin. So taking 700 acre feet out. But if you didn't do that and you put the 700 acre feet back in, and if you counted Table 13 water rights in some good years, and if you counted carryover credits on Seaside pumping from alternate producers, the case could be made that we actually have sufficient water today to not have any unlawful diversions, that you've satisfied the CDO. But we recognize too that, it's a priority to repay the accumulated deficit in the Seaside Basin, which is a use of water. It's an alternate use of water. It's a demand for water. And we also recognize that for a couple of years, we could have some interim supply from, for example, Marina Coast Water District's portion of the Pure Water Monterey expansion. So yeah, we could make the argument that there's enough water today to lift the CDO, but it could be back on us in 2 years, 3 years, or 4 years, depending on what's happening with.
I'm not necessarily trying to pursue the lifting of the CDO. I'm only pursuing the condition 2 issue. And what bothers me the most about condition 2 is that the state may have written that thinking that they were facing a 2016 deadline.
Oh, absolutely.
And now it's got a 2021, and no project that we're talking about is going to meet that deadline, that timetable. So the unintended consequence of this little kind of footnote issue should be just swept away, in my opinion. And that's why I'm encouraging whatever you do, push. Thank you.
Gary, Director Hoffman, you have anything? Director Hoffman?
Are we doing questions now?
Yes.
On added language, which talks about health and safety that was added in the CDO. Do we have any sense of what the intent of the water board using that specific language was in putting that in there? And the reason I ask, I have a hard time believing that they contemplated affordable housing as falling under the criteria that they were trying to address.
And I would agree with that. I think sweeping words, health and safety. What's interesting is you'll actually find a lot of the California state codes for affordable housing in the health and safety code. So there's definitely a nexus there, but so it's all, health and safety is always included affordable housing in its kind of large scale definition. But I suspect they probably meant something more related to water quality or water service, actual health, hospitals. It's hard to say, but the fact that the same state, different department, has now declared a crisis and that housing is health and safety, then it becomes one of those where, okay, how do we want to interpret that? If you look at the other parts of that language, if you kept the moratorium on new meters in effect, and if you kept the conservation measures in effect, which we've kind of vowed to do anyway, then there is this potential for saying, okay, the state's declared that they're going to try to find a way to fine the cities if they don't get moving on their housing needs. And the state has declared that housing is a health and safety issue. And we can't do anything without freeing up some water for housing. That's, I'm just trying to bring the two together, and they may not come together. But that
Director
seems to
Hoffman?
be the only path.
Director Hoffman, my recollection is that the state did not provide any defining language to go with that. It's basically so much boilerplate. I think it was there as a savings clause to make certain that the order could not be found to be arbitrary and capricious. So it's kind of a safety valve for the state. And as such, I think that any health and safety argument can be made, but it may not be made in a persuasive fashion, but it certainly gives the door open for this discussion.
If I may, I'll just follow.
Go ahead.
Is it true that the Health and Safety Code has identified affordable housing or housing in the provisions of the Health and Safety Code for quite a while? So that's not something new that SB 330 has changed in that respect. Is that a fair statement?
Yes. Yep.
And so we would be going to making a case before the state board of an argument on which they put language in and they know what their intent was. And as such, I don't know, I can't think of any incentive that they would have to change their outlook of what they meant. Notwithstanding what council said about it being boilerplate, just covering all the bases in that respect.
Yeah, I think we run that risk.
If I may chime in again.
Go ahead.
I think in one of your earlier slides, you identified 3 categories of housing, very low, low, and moderate. Is that in the language of 330, SB 330?
Well, it is. So there's actually 4 categories of housing. So what happens is the state at the housing and community development level says, we need this housing stock, and you guys down in this region need this much housing. And then the Association of Governments gets together and they say, well, Carmel, you're going to need this. Pacific Grove is going to need that. Monterey is going to need this. And within those numbers, there are 4 categories: very affordable, affordable, moderate, and I think it's above moderate, but it's basically market rate. And so they not only take the assigned housing allocation total numbers, but then they break it into those 4 categories.
Well, I'm just going back to the argument that when condition 2 was defined, written down, when condition 2 was written down, they were expecting a solution by 2016, 2017.
Right.
There's 5, 6, maybe 7 years worth of additional time added on that language did not anticipate. And now it's come to the point where that language reflects a micromanaging leverage over local discretion. And if there were no CDO, then we would be falling under the SB 330 demands. Because of the CDO and because of that condition 2, we're not only suffering from a micromanagement directive to us, to CalAm, But we're also, it's delayed. It's now 6 years later, and the state priorities have changed enormously since then. You can just tell by the emergency action of SB 330. I just think there's all sorts of health and safety options for argument that can be made back to the State Water Board.
Agreed, but you know, it's not an easy task because their priority one is to regulate water and be a regulator, so that they don't have an interest in just going, oh, okay, let's open this up. Issue number two is words have meaning, and the construction of the sentence says reductions, and it doesn't say anything in this order that affects the health and safety, which in fact it does. It does, you know, the conditions of condition 2 are very much related to the reductions. So, you know, there's a relationship, but it's the words having meaning. So they would have to find a path to interpret their own intent, maybe. But, you know, I think our goal is to lay it out in this manner for them, draft it in a manner that we request them to deal with this priority problem of another sister agency of the state, and try to interpret their language in a way that would open up the door, but not completely undermine the CDO as it relates to a water supply project and a permanent water supply.
And wouldn't that be a burden on us to try to create the legal logic of going through these doors sideways and under the limbo bar, whatever, in order to get out to the sunshine?
Yeah, we'd have to try to lead with our legal thinking, and then they'll either, you know, try to bend it to their will or to help it get bent to the needs of the community.
If I may just add that, so under that provision that was placed in there about health and safety, 2 points that I just want to make. One is, it would seem to me that if we went to the water board, we'd have to come up with findings of how that condition was met. And then going back to SB 330, there's a specified exclusion as relates to water. And so I just, from my perspective, I see it as SB 330 doesn't apply because specifically it took into account the situation that we are dealing under in the first place. So I guess my question is, would we not have to come up with findings of how we met that aspect of the condition?
Yeah, I think we would have to go down the path of simply stating that the intent of that paragraph was, if there are health and safety issues, then the state water board can provide relief. And then it wasn't intended to be just from the reductions, but it's relief. And then we would use SB 330 and many of the other bills that have been out there for housing, and use that to develop the findings. And we're not questioning the fact that they did carve out a lack of water as a reason not to allow housing under SB 330. But the actual findings of SB 330 are that the lack of housing is a crisis of major proportion and a health and safety issue. And so, you know, we utilize the current state focus on housing and the fears of all of our jurisdictions of penalties, withholding perhaps state transportation funding or any other sort of funding that the state can use for leverage, which the state has threatened. And we say it's a health and safety issue. The lack of housing is a health and safety issue. Let's fit it into the CDO through this door and try to create some relief.
And Dave, so ultimately, I guess what I'm kind of missing here is the whole point of going through the exercise. I mean, what is the ultimate benefit? Because there is no water. And so if it gets to the point where the state water board, if you could just explain what the end game is really for going down this road.
Right, right. And this goes back to, there's no agreement even among this board and staff that there is no water. There's legal water and there's illegal water in the system. And one could make the argument that there's proportionality. But the other piece of it is, even though we know the final legal right is 3376, we also know that the effective diversion limit is an interim legal right. And there's room in between those where you could put 50 or 60, 70 acre feet back into the system and not be at risk of breaking through the effective diversion limit. And so the end game is, as currently structured, even without setting of new meters, there are tools for enforcement for condition 2. And you're not going to get the state staffers or the board itself to send us an email saying, hey, if you do this project, yeah, we recognize that it's a change in use and it was a change in zoning and it looks like an increase in use, but we won't enforce. Because that's really kind of what's happened to date is we've had small projects that fit all four corners of the district's permitting and water counting regime that may not have passed muster with the state's view of condition 2, but they weren't significant. They were never brought to the state's attention, really inconsequential. But, by virtue of sending that email on the Garden Road piece and knowing that it's just a single master meter that you could put a flow restrictor on, there is the potential for enforcement. So unless somebody's going to say we won't enforce, then that specter is always hanging out there. So the goal would be to remove the threat of enforcement for a sufficient number of housing units that could get started during the remainder of the cease and desist order period. And the only way I see that happening at this point is with state participation instead of despite state participation. And it looks to me like the best avenue or the only avenue is under health and safety concerns.
There's a couple of questions I have. I wouldn't want the TAC to sit up there and start debating on how much water we should ask for. I think the district should, I counted 94 acre feet. That what they ask right now. I don't want to get bogged down with them asking for 200, 300, and we know what we can get. If it's 100, 125, I'm satisfied with that. I read the letter from Pacific Road. I liked it. They talked about land use, not getting caught up in that, the district. So I don't want to get caught up in the land use, but I want to get them water. And if we got to use these housing elements to do it, I prefer them. I hate to mention it, but that old water authority that the mayors have, chase that, not the district. Or we got a mayor rep, Director Potter, take that on with the mayors and try to generate a conversation with that. Also, do we need CEQA work on this? Do we have to do a EIR or negative deck? I like to see that moved along too, if we have to do it. I like to get to the state as soon as possible, but I know it's going to be a long road. But I like how you set it out. Gave me a little bit of hope today. So I like to force proceed, but I don't want to get bogged down in TAC, going back and forth with them on how much you need to set, or ask the board to set that number.
Yeah, and that's a great point. All the way back in the early 90s when we did the allocation EIR, we brought the cities together and the airport and the county, and ultimately there had to be one adult in the room who said, this is how we're going to do it. So I think we'll come up with some allocation concepts and try to hone in on what seems fair. But we're not going to go in and ask for 100 acre feet. You know, it's going to have to be a reasonable, limited number. And we're not going to say that everybody's created equal. If your city has an allocation and another city doesn't have an allocation, we have to think a little bit about the weighting of that. You know, there are a couple of high population cities and a couple of really tiny cities. So, you know, I think we just have to look across the board and say, you know, how do we want to do the mathematics of allocation of a small amount of water? And then the cities have to deal with first in, you know, which projects are they going to approve and what have you. I do think that we are not a land use organization. And I don't think we're going to say you can only use it for housing. I think the only way this happens, though, is if the state board says, all right, we've figured out a way to agree that you guys can split up 70 acre feet. But the health and safety risk is all about housing, so you better use it for housing. And suddenly, state board, who's also not a land use organization, just dictated land use.
Yeah, but I prefer them dictating it down to me while I get the water to the cities and they use it, you know, as they see fit. So if the state tell us down here they're supposed to just use it for housing, we give it to them and let the state track it.
Yep.
And find out. That's what. Mr. Laredo.
Yes, sir.
Oh, I thought you had a comment.
No.
Okay. Any other question on this before we move to the next discussion item?
You need to check on public out.
Oh, yes, please. Public out there.
Public comment. I see a hand raised by Kim Cole. Ms. Cole, please present your comment.
Thank you, Board of Directors, for this discussion this afternoon. I support the comments made by your Executive Director about trying to approach the State Water Resources Control Board about condition number 2. Our City Council has established for our staff that affordable housing and the construction of housing to deal with the crisis that not only our city is addressing, but the entire state of California is experiencing is our highest priority. As a result, you're seeing our city staff attend meetings like this Water Demand Committee meeting and trying to find creative solutions so we can build housing in the city of Monterey. We have a regional housing needs allocation of 650 units. Our progress towards that goal is abysmal. And if we're going to take care of people, we need to obtain water so we can work with the development community to build housing. So thank you very much for your discussion on this item. It's very important to our community. Thank you.
Thank you.
Andy Flower, please present your comment.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Please begin.
Thank you. I want to thank the Water Demand Committee and also the Water District, particularly Dave Stolt. Thank you for your outreach with the State Water Resources Control Board and for your hard work in helping us to get closer to a solution. I also want to let you know that that your efforts have also attracted additional interest in creating housing, affordable housing in our downtown area, as well as in an area that it will be focused on teacher housing. So we're very excited to maybe bring a couple of more projects to you and hope that you may consider those. And thank you for this time.
Thank you.
Actually, if you can open up Andy again, I need to ask her a question. And Stephanie, maybe this goes to you as well. You know, we only went to the jurisdictions, but with the Unified School District looking at teacher housing, is that in the city's numbers or is that outside the city's numbers?
That's a good question. That probably should have been in the city's numbers, and I don't know if they're discussing with the school district, but as I understand right now Monterey Peninsula is looking at some properties for future housing. They may not be in the city of Monterey. They may be.
Yeah, I think they had Seaside. So we need to scrutinize the numbers and circle back with the planners to find out if they're in or out of the city's numbers, and then include them in our analysis.
Well, and that also goes to potential needs for the government properties too.
Okay.
Well, on that, I would say go to the school district and let them tell you what they, going to the city, they probably don't know. Go to the school district and ask them what they plan on. I think some of the playgrounds in Seaside, they plan on putting housing. So, I think it's a little quicker that I don't want to get bogged down. It took them a long time just to give us what they gave us. So if we can move it along a little bit, I appreciate it. Any more from the board on this item or the committee? Okay, Dave, we can start on discussion item 3.
Yeah, and I guess I'll take this. I don't know why we put this on the agenda because we're not ready. We're currently in the midst of reviewing our rules and regs to see what control we have and also our programs to see both what rules affect and what benefits are available to the non-CalAm pumpers. And so we haven't really completed that yet. And I think we've just kind of added this as a standing item, but we're not prepared to talk about anything today.
Okay. And any suggested items for future placed on the board, the committee?
Chair Edwards, I do have a couple of comments on related to this item. That's okay. A suggestion, I think that it would be valuable to reach out to the Carmel Valley Association and Priscilla Walton as a stakeholder group to get them on board, and maybe they have some ideas of what kinds of things as it relates to conservation or reducing water use in the valley. And so I just think that it's always better to get buy-in from those affected than putting edicts on people and pushing things, down the throat. Not that we would do that, but I'm just dramatizing just the concept of bringing Carmel Valley Association into the discussion, because they know what they're doing out there, what's going on with irrigation and who's doing what and what the plans are in the valley. So that would be helpful when we bring this back, as well as if we could be provided with a menu of conservation mechanisms, or we can evaluate or present to the stakeholders and get their feedback on, that'd be helpful. I'd just like this to be more than just providing rebates for controllers without looking at changing behaviors potentially and of people and how they irrigate or use water on their properties. So that's kind of, I'd like to have this continue to be on the agenda just so it doesn't fall through the cracks and that we keep our eye on the ball. Thank you.
Yeah, both those comments are good. The CVA has a water subcommittee, and we've spent a lot of time both with the CVA and the water subcommittee on a variety of issues. This will be a new one, but it's absolutely a good idea. The other thing that we have started to do is identify all of the well owners, and we need to break them into categories, because you're going to have programs that you've got domestic supply, you've got business and agriculture, you got vintners, which I guess is agriculture, but we need to really identify the subgroups of the non-CalAm pumpers. We haven't done that yet either.
Yeah, because the way I see this from the long-term perspective is once CalAm has reduced their take from the Carmel River watershed, that's great starting point. But if we can even get the rest of the folks to reduce theirs, then that's even all the better for the riparian habitat, the environment of the Carmel River watershed. So yeah, that's, I just look forward to further discussions on this and moving forward.
Okay,
If I can just add,
I have something
briefly to that.
if you want.
There is a Carmel River Advisory Committee of sorts that exists, so that should be in the loop as well. Thanks.
John, were you about to say something?
Yes, thank you. Sorry to interrupt you, Director. My division has actually been working with the Carmel River Committee to go through and find identify some of the larger land uses and quantify those in an effort to approach those well owners and offer to not reduce overall pumping per se, but to build them more storage and to figure out if their land use would be amenable to building storage tanks and providing that with them so that they could be charged up when the river was full of water, and then the storage would be used in lieu of pumping on the river. So we're actually involved in some of that already.
John, are you contemplating forbearance agreements as a result of that type of thing, or just?
That's exactly. It would be a forbearance agreement in exchange for building of storage facilities for the well owners.
The other thing that occurred to me, and I think that's excellent, John, actually, had not occurred to me. When I think about the rain barrel program, this is just a rain barrel program on steroids kind of thing. But the other aspect is, it's my understanding that there's a significant number of properties that don't have actual meters. I don't know if something for us to consider is providing meters to those folks, or somehow requiring them to get meters. But that is my understanding, that there's not an insignificant number of folks that we really don't have accurate water usage data for. Is that a correct statement, John?
Yes, there is a statement. I don't know if it's a result of the application of our rules regarding our well reporting system. So at the onset, there was a choice of whether or not you would go what's called the land use method, and we mail a form out that every year says, well, tell us the acreages you have of different things, how many animals you have. And our rules have, just like the fixture rules, our rules have very specific water consumption numbers with different land use types. And we have since said, if you're on a land use method and you sell your house or the property changes ownership, you must meter. But there are still a handful of landowners or families or family trusts that passed that grandfathered in land use method that do not have meters on. It would require changing our rules, but that would be a method to move towards metering those properties.
Are the number of folks in your knowledge of the area that are not metered or that are using the land use method significant, or not?
No, I would say that it's off the top of my head, less than 10% and maybe closer to 5% of the people reporting water use.
And just for my edification, do they get charged by us on the volume of water that they report?
No, in fact, our rules state that we are going to monitor water use and have no desire or ability to charge them. So that was actually written into the very same rules in the reporting program.
Okay, because my concern would be if we were charging them to be incentivized to underreport or underreport or identify different land uses which would give them a lower level of water usage. But since we're not charging, then there's not that incentive. That's good to know. Thanks.
It's actually ironically the other direction, that people tend to over-report water use in those situations, because if they were to change land use, it would require metering, and to change land use would have to show a reduction in water use. So it actually creates the opposite behavior.
Interesting. Thank you.
George, you have anything else?
No, no, I don't.
Okay, General Manager, I think the city of Seaside has that same problem that Monterey has with Garden Road. But they're gonna add water to it. They need it. I think their situation is metering. They had 2 buildings on the property where they're gonna build these 5 apartment complexes or whatever, that apartment complex. And they probably be coming to the district asking about what can we do to help them. So as soon as we get it, can we please get it on the Water Demand Committee?
They've already come in. There's some confusion though. So our staff is working with them because one of the first ones in has greater needs than 2 5/8-inch meters would satisfy. And
Right.
so, yeah.
Thank you. You're aware. So I'm glad they got in. Okay, if anything else, I'll adjourn this meeting. Thank you all and see you at the next one.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.